The HOA cop is shouting, gun drawn, veins bulging, as my 20-year-old son stands calm as a lake, hands raised, not out of fear, but calculation. Because what the uniformed man doesn't realize is that my boy isn't just visiting his dad, he's special forces and he's fully armed. Yep, that's my son. You're probably wondering how we got here. I moved to the Creek House for the quiet. After 30 years of clients, contracts, and conflict, I was ready for a place where the loudest thing on a Saturday morning was the wind flirting with my back porch wind chimes. The house backed up to a slow silver stream shaded by willows and peppered with river stones. I didn't have much use for neighborhood chatter. I kept my lawn tight, my grill clean, and my head down. My neighbors were a strange mix of retirees, hobby gardeners, and ex-corporate wanderers like myself. It was peaceful, or at least it used to be. I'd bought into Willow Creek Estates because it wasn't a gated gulag. It was a proper mixed-age community where nobody bothered you unless you let your magnolia tree touch the sidewalk. That was before the HOA got ideas, before the board president died, and a new wave of clipboard crusaders slithered in, looking to turn our lazy little slice of suburban freedom into a curated retirement colony. Before they decided to draw the line, not at noise or yard decor, but at bloodlines and birthdays. My son, Jason, started visiting again about a year after his last deployment. He's 20 now. Built like a linebacker, walks like a predator, talks like a monk, quiet kid, always has been. When he first came back, we didn't talk much, just grilled out by the stream, caught a few bass, sat in the silence we both needed. Every weekend, like clockwork, he'd drive in, park his truck behind the hydrangeas, and toss his duffel over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. He never stayed more than 2 nights. Never caused a problem. Never raised his voice. Just helped fix up the shed, cooked his ridiculous protein-packed chili, and sat on the porch with me until the stars came out. That's when it started. The stares. The whispers. It began subtle, the way people would slow down when he jogged through the neighborhood. The way the HOA president's wife, Donna, would cross to the other side of the street when he passed her yappy little corgi. At first I thought it was the tattoos, or maybe the muscle. Jason doesn't look like the boys in this neighborhood. He looks like someone who's seen things and didn't flinch, but I'd underestimated just how small-minded our board had become. The letter came in a cream-colored envelope, sealed with gold foil and a grotesquely official-looking emblem, Willow Creek O Community Initiative. Inside, a single-page memo, effective immediately. The HOA will begin a transition toward a 55 Yaone community designation. It went on about maturity demographics, resident preferences, and enhanced tranquility. The words got nastier the further you read. Resident guests under the age of 30 must be pre-approved by the board for overnight stays. All non-resident guests must carry visible identification while in shared spaces. Length of visit not to exceed 72 hours without written approval. Jason was sitting at the kitchen table sharpening a knife not because he needed to, just because it calms him. I handed him the letter. He read it without blinking. "So I'm non-compliant now," he said, setting the blade down. I nodded. He didn't say anything else. Just folded the letter, slipped it back in the envelope, and tossed it into the trash. We both knew what this was. They weren't afraid of crime or disruption. They were afraid of anything they couldn't tame. And my son, clean-cut, quiet, deadly, was the kind of presence you either respected or feared. The board, predictably, chose the latter. Next came the patrols. First, it was the usual suspects, Greg with the knee brace who walked his poodle like it was a surveillance drone, and Linda with the oversized sunglasses who somehow always managed to coincidentally pass by when Jason was lifting weights in the backyard. Then it escalated. The board created a new Community Compliance Committee, a fancy name for a rotating band of retirees with too much time and a dangerous sense of self-importance. They started parking at the end of my street. Black clipboards, disposable coffee cups, and binoculars that weren't even subtle. Jason would wave at them when he jogged past. They never waved back. I confronted them once, asked if they were casing houses or birdwatching. They just muttered something about documenting visible violations, whatever that meant. I made a point to keep things clean. Jason cut the grass twice a week, our recycling bins were sorted to perfection, and the American flag hanging from the porch post was replaced after every thunderstorm. But none of that mattered. It wasn't about violations, it was about visibility. Jason didn't belong in their curated brochure vision of Willow Creek, and that, apparently, was intolerable. The real turn came when the HOA hired a private security liaison. No announcement, no vote, no background check. Just a self-appointed authority figure who started showing up at neighborhood entrances, wearing a uniform shirt from some defunct mall cop agency, a silver badge that looked suspiciously like it came from Amazon, and a utility belt he didn't know how to wear. His name was Carl, a sweaty man with a shaved head, mirrored sunglasses, and an attitude inflated by a high-sodium diet and unchecked delusion. He claimed he was a retired corrections officer. I doubted he'd ever passed a real physical. The first time Jason encountered him, Carl tried to stop him at the front gate. Jason doesn't rattle easily. He rolled down his window and gave a polite, "Can I help you?" Carl demanded to see his license and HOA visitor ID. Jason smiled and said, "I'm just going to my dad's house, sir." Carl said he hadn't seen his name on the pre-approved guest list. Jason said, "That's because we don't follow unconstitutional curfews in this country." Carl didn't like that. He told Jason to park and wait while he radioed this in. Jason waited 3 seconds, then pulled through and drove off. That's when Carl took it personally. The next weekend, I was up early making coffee when Jason walked in looking a little more alert than usual. "Your new security guy tailgated me down the street last night," he said, calmly pouring water into the kettle. "Got out of his car with a flashlight and tried to block me in the driveway. Said he had authority to detain me." I stared at him. "And what did you do?" Jason shrugged. "Told him to back up, or I'd call the sheriff." I waited. "He backed up," he said, with a small smile. But Carl wasn't done, not by a long shot. He started waiting at the gate, parked like a vulture, looking for Jason's truck. Started making notes, taking photos, even tried to get Jason's plates run by a buddy in the sheriff's office, a buddy who promptly called me, confused and irritated. I told him to ignore it, and he agreed, but Carl didn't stop. He started telling neighbors we were under review, said Jason was known to authorities, started implying he was involved in something nefarious. That's when Jason stopped jogging in the neighborhood and started walking the perimeter instead. He never said it, but I could tell he was drawing the line. Then came the incident. I came home from the hardware store to find Jason standing at the kitchen island, arms crossed. "Carl blocked me in again," he said. This time he called me a trespasser. My blood ran hot. "Where?" I asked. "At the gate." Tried to stand in front of the truck, hand on his hip like he was carrying. "Was he?" Jason nodded. "He had a holster. Looked empty last time. Not today." I stared at him. "Did he pull it?" Jason's eyes were steel. "No, but he wanted to. You could see it." I didn't ask what happened next. I knew my son. If Carl had made one wrong move, it would have ended very differently. That was the day I realized this wasn't about HOA policy anymore. It wasn't about property values or noise complaints or aesthetics. This was about fear and power. And men like Carl, who crumble under the weight of real authority, desperately trying to cosplay as enforcers in a neighborhood full of gardeners and retirees. The board had emboldened him. And now he was escalating. Jason wasn't just non-compliant. He was the symbol of everything they couldn't control, and they were preparing to act on it. They had no idea how badly they'd misjudged their target. My son didn't just serve, he'd been trained for situations far more dangerous than Carl in a golf cart with a Glock and a grudge. And if they pushed him too far, they wouldn't just be breaking the law, they'd be stepping into a situation so far above their pay grade, they'd need oxygen masks just to comprehend it. They thought this was their neighborhood, but they were about to learn the hard way. When you point a gun at a soldier, you'd better be sure who's really holding the high ground. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning meant for bacon and black coffee and barefoot porch sitting. Jason had run to the gas station to grab eggs, we were out, and I was halfway through seasoning a skillet when my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer. That morning I did. All I heard on the other end was breathing. Then a gravel-thick voice. "This is your son's phone. You should get to the front gate. Click. I stood still, staring at the screen, until the silence in the kitchen started ringing. Then I grabbed my keys. By the time I reached the gate, I could hear shouting. Not angry shouting, but the panicked, adrenaline-soaked barking of a man who knew he was already in over his head but couldn't stop digging. Carl stood in the middle of the road, legs wide like a cowboy at high noon, one hand outstretched, the other gripping a sidearm pointed directly at my son's chest. "Get on the ground!" Carl screamed, voice cracking. "Right now. Face down, hands where I can see them." Jason stood calm as ever, arms lifted slowly, palms open, eyes steady on Carl like he was cataloging weaknesses. No panic, no twitch, no sudden moves. Just still, grounded, like a statue with a pulse. "You don't want to do this," he said quietly. "You really don't." Carl took a step forward, gun raised. His hand was shaking. "You're trespassing. You're a threat. You match the description of a suspect seen in the area." Jason tilted his head slightly, like he was genuinely curious how Carl expected that line to hold up in court. "You've seen me every weekend for the last 4 months," he said. "And I've been cleared by the actual police department. You even waved at me last week, remember?" Carl's face flushed a deeper red, whether from embarrassment or rage I couldn't tell. I rolled to a stop just behind Jason's truck, leapt out and started yelling. "Carl, you drop that gun right now!" He spun halfway toward me, the muzzle of the pistol trailing between my son's chest and my own ribcage. "Stay back!" I moved slowly, hands up, keeping my voice low. "You've lost the plot, man. That's my son. He's unarmed. He's not a threat. You're on private property, with a drawn weapon, against a resident guest." "He's not registered," Carl snapped. "He's not approved. The board said he's a threat. He parked outside the designated area and you think that's worth a drawn gun?" I cut in. "You think the county's going to see it that way? You think your badge means anything when it's bought in a novelty store and you're pointing a live weapon at an unarmed man on public roadway?" Carl hesitated just long enough. Jason moved. I didn't see it coming. I just blinked, and suddenly the gun was out of Carl's hand, and Carl himself was on his knees, hands behind his back, his head gently pressed toward the pavement by the full weight of my son's left knee. No bruises, no shouting, just surgical precision and overwhelming presence. "This is a control hold," Jason said flatly. "I haven't dislocated anything. Yet." Carl whimpered, trying to twist free. "You attacked me. He attacked me." Jason just looked at me. "Call the sheriff," he said calmly. I was already dialing. By the time the patrol car pulled up, Jason had stepped away, arms crossed, posture loose but ready. Carl stayed on the ground, panting and red-faced, trying to play the victim now that his fantasy of being the neighborhood's enforcer had shattered in front of the welcome sign. Deputy Waters got out of the cruiser, hand hovering over his own holster. He looked between us, then down at Carl. "You again," he muttered. "What is it this time?" "I was assaulted," Carl cried. "I was conducting a legal detention of a suspicious person. This punk went for my weapon." Jason didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Deputy Waters turned to me. "Mind telling me what really happened?" I told him. Every step. Every word. Then I showed him my phone. Video footage. Jason had started recording the second he pulled up to the gate. Clean, clear evidence of Carl escalating, drawing, and aiming. Waters watched the clip in silence. Then he looked at Carl. "You drew first?" Carl sputtered. "He was unregistered. He's a combatant. He moved like a professional." "That's not illegal, Carl. You know what is?" Waters asked, folding his arms. "Brandishing a firearm without cause. You're not sworn law enforcement. You're not licensed. You're not even contracted. You're just a homeowner with a power complex and a delusion." I felt the wave of justice roll toward shore, but then Waters hesitated. His voice dropped. "Thing is," he muttered, "this neighborhood, it's got some pull." And there it was. The moment the scales shifted, the moment justice stuttered, the deputy rubbed the back of his neck. "The board's been, generous to the department. Equipment grants, civic partnership stuff." I narrowed my eyes. "So what? That buys them immunity?" Waters sighed. "No, but it buys them time. If I bring Carl in, there'll be calls, from above, and I'd have to explain why I didn't go through proper protocol. Chain of command. Chain of command? I barked. Carl pulled a gun on my son in broad daylight on public access community road. He escalated without cause. You have it on video. Waters nodded slowly. And I'll file it. I will, but don't expect cuffs, not today. Jason didn't react. He stood there, arms crossed, watching the entire play unfold like a man who's seen this scene before, only with higher stakes and real casualties. Me? I felt my stomach turn. Because now I saw it. This wasn't random. This wasn't one HOA nutcase losing his grip. This was deliberate, coordinated, an op. Not a good one, but a setup nonetheless. They weren't just pushing Jason out. They were hoping to bait him into a fight, into an arrest, into something they could spin as justification for the 55 HOA policy, the background checks, the perimeter patrols. This wasn't about violations anymore. It was about leverage, image, control. And they picked the wrong damn family to mess with. Because what they didn't know, what Carl still didn't understand as he sat sobbing on the curb while the deputy filed a half-hearted report, was that Jason didn't just serve, he was still serving. Special Forces, active reserve, cleared for operations I wasn't even allowed to know about. And what they really didn't know was that the incident they just triggered, it wasn't going to be swept under the rug. It wasn't going to end in a whisper. Carl had drawn a weapon on a U.S. service member on American soil with no authority and no cause. That wasn't just a policy violation, that was a federal problem. And now, it was my problem to solve. That evening, Jason handed me a jump drive. Footage from the past 6 weeks, he said simply. Gate cams, drone footage, I've been monitoring them. I stared. You've been surveilling the HOA? He shrugged. You told me to stay busy. Where'd you get this drone? He smirked. Wouldn't you like to know? I sat down, heart thudding, and opened the first folder. What I saw made my blood run cold and my strategy crystal clear. Hidden meetings, redacted minutes, a vote that was never ratified. A fake contractor approval for Carl's security role. Fraud, plain and simple. And if the sheriff wouldn't act, I knew someone who would, someone who owed me a favor. Jason leaned against the counter, arms folded. You ready to burn it all down? I looked at him. No, I said. I'm ready to clean house, legally, publicly, permanently. Because these people wanted a controlled community. They wanted order, silence, obedience, but they forgot something fundamental. When you play war games in a neighborhood, eventually you meet someone who's actually been to war. The silence after the gate incident was the kind that comes before a storm, not the loud thunderclap kind, but the slow building one, a barometric drop you feel in your bones. After Carl drew his weapon, after the deputy left without cuffs, after my son handed me a jump drive full of more surveillance footage than most precincts have on file, I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I didn't march to the HOA office and throw a chair through the window, tempting as that was. No. I did what my grandfather taught me to do when the wolves come too close. I got real quiet. I got methodical. And I got to work. The first place I went wasn't a lawyer's office. It wasn't the sheriff's department. It was a beige little building behind the courthouse with no sign and a busted vending machine, the county records archive. Most folks don't even know it exists. But if you've ever sued a municipality or filed a challenge against a land use change, you know it's the nerve center of everything the HOA doesn't want you to read. I spent 6 hours there, flipping through scanned PDFs and yellowed filing folders until my fingers smelled like dust and bureaucracy. And there it was, tucked between an application for a clubhouse expansion and a record of electrical upgrades for the tennis courts. A document labeled, Intent to Transition to Age, Restricted Community, Resolution, 1148, dated, stamped, and unsigned. Not a single actual homeowner signature on the petition, just typed names. That wasn't legal, that wasn't enforceable, that was fraud, plain and simple. I took pictures of everything, every missing line, every vote attributed to a homeowner who'd since moved away or died. And then I called Sandra. Sandra's not just a friend, she's the kind of person you call when you need a knife sharpened in a courtroom. A bulldog in heels with a photographic memory and a license to litigate in 3 states. We hadn't talked since the pandemic, but when I sent her the footage of Carl drawing down on my son, she called me back in 7 minutes. "This smells like a Rico starter kit," she said, already pulling files on her laptop. "And that 55 yaun vote? You could wipe the floor with that in front of a county judge." Jason, meanwhile, had turned the guest bedroom into a full-blown command center. Laptop, monitors, DVRs from half a dozen trail cams he'd mounted on trees and light posts, each one tagged and time-stamped. "They've got 5 new checkpoints rotating in 2-man shifts," he said one morning, pointing to a screen where 2 retirees in golf shirts were snapping pictures of a car windshield. "And they're logging plates of anyone under 40 who comes in, no citations, just logging." Another video showed Karen, the HOA board president, meeting a notary in her driveway. Jason paused the footage. "That guy, not a real notary. Facial match came back. He's a cousin of her husband, works at a used car lot in town." It got worse. We discovered that Carl, the security liaison, wasn't just unlicensed, he was flagged in a public safety database for impersonating law enforcement. Back in 2008, he'd tried to pass himself off as a marshal at a county fair and got banned from 3 municipal facilities. Somehow that little detail had slipped past the board. Or, more likely, they just didn't care, because Carl did what they wanted. He scared people. He enforced policies they didn't have the legal backbone to stand behind. And for people like Karen, fear was the easiest tool in the box. Jason went deeper, pulled emails from the public HOA contact account because Karen, in all her infinite paranoia, had never properly secured the domain. He found forwarded messages from board members bragging about weeding out the riffraff and keeping the community clean and orderly. That alone wouldn't hold up in court, but it painted a picture. Especially when we matched those emails with a growing list of selective enforcement records. Hispanic family fined $200 for an unregistered vehicle, while the board treasurer's nephew had 3 junkers parked on his lawn. A young couple given a violation for hosting a disruptive social gathering at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, while Karen's own birthday bash went until 1 a.m. with a rented DJ and an open bar. The hypocrisy wasn't just gross, it was systemic. Then we dug into the ballots. Every vote on new rules had been pushed through by supermajority approval, according to the board's announcements. But when we matched the votes to the current owner registry, something cracked. Dead people were voting, rentals were voting. A house that'd been empty for 11 months had cast 4 votes. Jason built a spreadsheet. I cross-referenced signatures. We found over 24 instances of proxy votes signed by the same 3 hands: Karen, her vice president Douglas, and a woman named Myrna, who'd been volunteering to deliver community ballots on her golf cart. They were manufacturing consent, 1 phantom signature at a time. I started building the case, not just a civil suit, a presentation, something that could live outside a courtroom. Something meant to be seen by every resident, every neighbor, and, if we played it right, every local reporter and planning commissioner within a 100-mile radius. I pulled together footage, documents, and witness statements. Jason worked the angles. We had statements from the 2 teenagers who'd been denied pool access because they looked too young, despite being accompanied by their parents. We had a spreadsheet of every fine issued over the past 2 years and a visual heat map showing how they clustered, almost exclusively, around homes owned by residents under 50. The board wasn't running a community. They were running a quiet purge. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted daylight. I wanted everyone in that neighborhood to see the bones beneath the lawn ornaments. I wanted Karen's perfect little HOA castle to crumble in front of the same people she used to wave at while sipping Chardonnay on her porch swing. So we planned the strike. Not dramatic, not loud, but precise. We picked the quarterly HOA meeting. The one where Karen would be presenting her vision plan for finishing the 55 yaon transition, complete with a proposal to raise dues and limit non-resident guest hours. Jason printed off copies of the full audit. We got them professionally bound. I had 20 copies delivered in advance to key residents, 1 to a local reporter, 1 to the city's zoning board, 1 to the county commissioner's office, and 1 to a retired judge who just happened to live 5 streets over and had once fined me for burning leaves on a no-burn day. Jason made sure the projector was synced with his cloud drive. He'd rigged the AV system during the neighborhood movie night the month prior, just in case. Not because he's paranoid. Because he's thorough. Always be 5 moves ahead, he said, drinking coffee like he was on a stakeout instead of in our kitchen. And when they move, don't move back. Move forward harder. I nodded. My hands were steady, but my mind buzzed. Because I knew what came next. They'd try to block me from speaking. They'd scream about procedure, about order, about how this isn't the right forum. But it wouldn't matter. Because by the time they figured out what was coming, it would already be too late. Carl had drawn a gun. That was the spark. But now the gasoline was soaked deep into every rule they'd twisted, every vote they'd faked, every resident they'd quietly bullied into silence. They thought they could write us out of our own neighborhood. They forgot the one truth nobody likes to say out loud. You push a quiet man too far, and he stops being quiet. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 6:00 p.m., but by 5:20, there was already a line forming outside the community center. Lawn chairs, scraped concrete. Water bottles were passed out like it was a 4th of July potluck. But this wasn't a celebration, this was the reckoning. Word had gotten around, not from me, not directly. I hadn't said a word on Nextdoor or the Facebook group, but 20 glossy audit packets had a funny way of walking themselves from mailbox to mailbox. You can't stop wildfire with a kindly refer to the covenants email. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, every spot was full. Jason was already there, leaning against my old truck in a plain black shirt, arms crossed, looking like the end of someone's story. He didn't say anything, just handed me a folder and nodded toward the community center. They're all inside. Karen's pacing. Carl's posted at the door like a Rottweiler with half a badge. I chuckled, low and quiet. He armed? Jason shook his head. Nah, not today. His carry license got suspended this morning. Funny thing, someone filed a weapons complaint with the state licensing board last week. And someone else dropped off the footage of him drawing on me. I nodded. Convenient. Jason gave me the kind of grin that didn't show teeth. Also got a guest of honor waiting in the back lot. Said he wouldn't miss this for the world. Inside, the energy was electric. Neighbors who never even looked up from their mailboxes were now packed, shoulder to shoulder, whispering like gossip was oxygen. At the head of the room, the board sat in their usual thrones, Karen in her white blazer, chin tilted just high enough to seem above the plebeians. Doug the treasurer flipping through a folder full of absolutely nothing, Myrna blinking behind oversized glasses, clearly unaware of the grenade about to land in her lap. Carl stood by the main door in an ill-fitting polo that still bore the faded logo of Metro Security Solutions, even though that company had dissolved in 2013. Karen banged her little gavel, like she was presiding over Congress. Let's come to order. This is the quarterly Willow Creek HOA meeting. We will not tolerate interruptions, shouting, or unauthorized agenda items. Now, item 1, the proposed restriction on weekday guest hours. I stepped forward. I have an agenda item, actually. Karen's jaw locked. Sir, this is not open comment time. You'll need to sit until the... I dropped a thumb drive onto the center podium. Article 5, Section 12.3 of the bylaws, Emergency Clause. If a resident presents credible evidence of board misconduct, they are allowed to address the membership immediately. Karen sputtered. That's... Page 38, I said, staring her dead in the eye. You'd know that if you actually read the documents you forged. A few people gasped. Myrna dropped her pen. Jason moved to the back wall where he'd already synced the thumb drive to the projector. Slide 1. The gate cam footage. Carl, sweating and furious, weapon drawn, barking orders at my son like he was in a bad cop show. No context, no editing. Just raw, 1008 truth. You could hear Carl say the words, "You match the description of a suspect." You could hear Jason calmly reply, "This is my father's house. I've been here every weekend for months." You could watch Carl reach for the trigger. Karen tried to interrupt. That footage is illegally. Slide 2. Carl's badge. An Amazon screenshot of the same prop badge for $29.99. Next to it, a letter from the county clerk's office confirming Carl had no security license. Never had. Never filed. Slide 3. Karen's 55 Yaon ballot. 26 signatures, all in the same handwriting, overlaid with property records showing 6 of those signers had been deceased for years. Jason stood silently by the wall, flipping each slide like he was turning the pages of a courtroom indictment. Slide 4. A scanned letter from the State Licensing Bureau, effective immediately. Carl's weapon permit revoked pending investigation into impersonation of law enforcement. Slide 5. The enforcement heat map. Jason's pride and joy. A glowing chart that showed how fines, citations, and surveillance measures had targeted residents under 50 at a rate 5 times higher than anyone else. You could feel the room shift. And then came the twist. The part nobody expected, not even Karen. From the back door, a man walked in. Tall, military posture, gray suit, clean cut, clipboard in hand. He walked right up to Karen, extended his badge, a real one this time, and said, "Agent Talbot, Department of Homeland Security. I'm here to formally receive evidence of fraudulent municipal conduct, falsified age discrimination policies, and impersonation of federal law enforcement." Karen went pale. Agent Talbot looked toward Jason and nodded. "Sergeant, thanks for the assist." Jason didn't nod back. He didn't move. He just kept flipping slides. Myrna stood up first. I didn't know," she stammered. "They said the votes were real. They said we were just cleaning up the neighborhood." Doug was next. "I resign," he said quietly, hands shaking. Karen tried to gather her things, but the press had already entered through the side door. Notebooks, recorders, rolling cameras, the local paper, Channel 5. Even that guy from the HOA watchdog blog who always wore Hawaiian shirts. Agent Talbot turned to the crowd. "You should know this isn't just a community issue anymore. What happened here crosses state lines. That means federal jurisdiction. We'll be following up with every affected resident." Carl, now huddled by the fire exit, tried to slip out. The deputy from the last incident stopped him. "Not this time, Carl." The board resigned mid-meeting, one by one, each stepping down like rats off a ship with a hole in the hull and a flaming engine. When it was over, people just clapped. Not loud, not wild, but the kind of slow, stunned applause you hear when the magician pulls off the trick you didn't think was possible. Outside, the sun had started to set behind the trees. Jason walked up to the gate, reached into the truck bed and pulled out a sign, one he'd made by hand, in the garage, the day after Carl pulled a gun on him. He mounted it right above the HOA's old plaque, drilling it into the wooden post like it belonged there from the start. White paint on black metal, no serif fonts, no logos, just bold truth. This community welcomes all ages, especially those who know the law better than you do. By the following week, ballots were mailed out for the formation of a new HOA board, this time with oversight from county officials, this time with actual rules, real transparency. No clipboards, no checkpoints, and not a single pretend security force in sight. Jason and I sat on the porch that evening, coffee in hand, watching a family move in 2 houses down. A young couple, maybe early 30s, 2 kids, chasing each other through the yard. The daughter had a toy sword. The boy wore a superhero cape. "I like them already," Jason said. "Yeah," I replied, "me too." The wind blew soft across the stream. The gate creaked slightly in the distance. And the neighborhood? For the first time in a long time, it felt like home again.